It's time for America Outdoors Radio, the show that covers the outdoor scene across the U.S. of A. and the entire continent. Fishing, hunting, conservation, outdoor recreation, and great destinations, we cover it all every week. It's your country, your outdoors. Let's explore it together with your host, John Kruse.
Welcome to the show. I hope you're having a great weekend. I know I just got to do some bass fishing the last couple days in a tournament, and I'll let you know next week exactly how I did. This week on the show, we got some great guests for you. That includes Wade Middleton. He is going to tell you about Outdoor Action TV. Now, this is a channel that's got probably 50 different shows on it, some really high-quality ones too. But the great thing about Outdoor Action TV is that you don't have to pay a premium fee to go ahead and watch all these great fishing and hunting shows. So Wade's going to tell you exactly how you can take in Outdoor Action TV on your phone, on your computer, or on your television. And I think, like me, you're going to get hooked. Speaking of hooked, we're going to talk to Matt Hahn. He's a fisheries biologist with Wyoming Game and Fish. They just completed a study about hooking injuries and mortalities on trout in the Cowboy State, and I think you're going to find this conversation to be very interesting. And in just a minute, you're going to hear from John Childs. He is an outdoors writer who last fall got to go to New York, specifically Chataqua County, for some walleye and muskie fishing. And this isn't the New York City experience at all. No, this is some great fishing, some great country, and like I said, John's going to tell you all about it in just a minute here. Our other guest, that would be Joe Cermele, the fishing editor for Outdoor Life magazine. He just penned a great article about pike fishing. He's got all sorts of great tips for you if you want to see if you can hook into one of these big toothy fish this spring or summer. This portion of the show is brought to you by our friends at Henry Repeating Arms, and turkey season is pretty well underway everywhere at this point. And if you are not satisfied with the shotgun you have, take a look at the single shot turkey camo shotgun available from Henry Repeating Arms. It's got a high-vis sight. It's all camouflaged. It's just a quality shotgun. And this is definitely something you'll want to take to the woods. And I'm pretty sure you'll have some great success if you do. Like all of the firearms from Henry Repeating Arms, this one is made in America. It is rugged. It's reliable. It's accurate right out of the box. And it's going to be perfect to help you bag a gobbler this spring. Find out more at henryusa.com. And don't forget to ask for your free decals and catalog while you're there. Our next guest is John Childs. He's an outdoors writer, and last fall he got to go to New York to a place I'm not familiar with to go fishing, Chataqua Lake. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, you betcha. Well, you know, I read this article that you wrote and was very intrigued, and I think of New York, and I think most people think of New York. They think of New York City and all the urban sprawl and the Hudson River. That's not at all the place you were fishing, was it?
No, not at all. In fact, I kind of thought the same thing. When I first got an invite to New York, I'm like, really? I don't know if I want to go to New York to go fishing. What's so magic about that? But actually, so northeast from New York City by quite a stretch, and that's right at the tip of the east side of Lake Erie. And then rented a car, and it was about an hour and 20-minute drive, hour and 15 minutes to Chataqua County. And it was right in the middle of this beautiful fall colors because it was first week of October. The drive was gorgeous, and you're just in these rolling mountains in the northeast. Let me tell you, what a beautiful place, and no urban sprawl. I mean, it's just this fantastic little patchwork of woods and little, small farms. What a beautiful place.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. Now, you were invited to participate with a number of other outdoors writers in a fish camp. And I've participated in these myself, but yours looked to be a little bit more comfortable than the ones I was with. You were actually in what, an Airbnb?
Well, yeah, it probably was an Airbnb. I mean, it was just they'd rented a house that had, I think, 5 or 6 bedrooms, and it was right on the shores of Lake Chataqua. And again, just a gorgeous place, but it was kind of neat because if you notice in the article, I put fish camp in air quotes because, it was anything but a camp. It was pretty posh, I got to admit.
And your host, was it the Chataqua County Tourism Bureau?
Yes, sir. That's exactly who invited me. And then it was hosted by Forrest Fisher is his pen name, but his actual name is David Barris. Just a prince of a gentleman, and he's the one who hosted it for Chataqua County Tourism Bureau, and he basically put the whole thing together and had guides lined up and had like some local wines there for us, and of course we ate the fish we caught, which compared wonderfully with his New York Rieslings. Oh my gosh, I never knew New York had such great Rieslings.
I had no idea either. Good to know. So let's talk about fishing on Chataqua Lake. It's a lake I'm not familiar with. Is this a really big body of water?
It's a lot bigger than you think. It's kind of long and narrow. So, it's never more than, I don't know, I'd have to look on a map, but, a mile or two wide. So pretty narrow, but real long. And they're kind of split it up into a north and south end, and the north end has the tendency to be shallower, actually I think it's deeper and weedier, and then the south is like more of a muddy type bottom. But they definitely separated. They call the south end and the north end, and fished both. We fished mostly muskies on the south end, and then came up towards the middle of the lake to the north end to fish walleye. But let me tell you, I've not been on a lot of lakes that had quite so much forage in it. You could just imagine, as I wrote in the article, that those walleyes seemed to me like they were probably fat old house cats sitting on the bottom, and it's like, well, it's going to take something pretty big to like get my interest going.
So you actually caught a bunch of fish, but not necessarily the fish you were after.
We ended up catching a decent amount of walleye, but yeah, not as many as you would think on Chataqua Lake, but we caught all kinds of stuff. I mean, black and white crappie, we caught rock bass, we caught white bass, we caught silver perch. Yeah, I mean, and a bunch of stuff I'm forgetting. It was just crazy. There were fish coming over the gunnel all the time, but there were walleye mixed into it, definitely.
Now, the next place you got to fish, Lake Erie, and I would say that arguably this is the best walleye fishery in North America. Tell us about this trip.
Well, based on what I saw, I'm guessing it probably is. The guys who fished the day before me on Erie had a much better day just because the lake was glass calm. And on the day we fished it, we had a pretty windy day, and so the waves come up pretty good. And it wasn't quite the same fishery, but again, we caught fish all day long. I mean, there was never a shortage of walleye coming over the gunnel. We caught a bunch of big yellow as well, and we also caught one sheephead, which to me looks, I'm living in Texas now and fish the Gulf Coast a lot, and what they call a sheephead looks to me really like a black drum.
Oh, I saw the picture, and I agree with you completely. It looks just like a black drum.
I know, and they said it doesn't eat well. And, down here, I don't know if you've ever eaten a black drum, but you get those small black drums, not the giant ones, the big, mating pairs that you find in the fall or the spring. These are the, 4, 5, 6 pound puppy drum, we call them. They are probably some of the best table fare on the Gulf Coast. And so when they said that sheepheads wasn't very good to eat, I'm like, well, I've eaten a lot of fish that look just like that, and they're pretty dang good.
It's funny, the reputation that certain fish get. Sometimes it is definitely undeserved. If our listeners want to plan a trip to this part of New York to go fishing at Chataqua Lake or Lake Erie, is there a website you'd recommend?
Absolutely. It's tourchataqua.com. And I'll spell that real fast just because, my gosh, how are you going to remember that, right? It's tour, T-O-U-R, Chataqua, CHAUTAUQUA.com. And they have a full website with a 124-page visitor's guidebook. And you could also call the office directly there, and that's 866-908-4569. And people can help you figure out what you want to do. But what a great place to visit.
All right, the website again, tourchataqua.com. Go fishing at Chataqua Lake. Go fishing at Lake Erie. Plan a trip this fall. Take in all the colors. I think you're going to love it. John, thanks so much for sharing this with us today on America Outdoors Radio.
Thanks, John.
We've been telling you about Sportsman's Cove Lodge in Southeast Alaska for a while now, and there's a reason. They are the only Alaska lodge we talk about in this show. It's because they're truly Alaska's best lodge. The adventure starts with a float plane ride from Ketchikan, after which you'll get the chance to experience some of the best hospitality, food, and wonderful people you'll ever meet. Wildlife is abundant, from bears and deer to eagles and whales, and let's not forget the reason you're here, the fishing. Halibut, salmon, lingcod, rockfish, true cod, and more. It's all waiting for you in abundance at Sportsman's Cove Lodge. Book your trip today at alaskasbestlodge.com. That's alaskasbestlodge.com for Sportsman's Cove Lodge.
Campers, adventure seekers, hunters, and foodies. No matter the lifestyle, we can all agree on one thing. Great food and great people are worth remembering. At Camp Chef, we don't just make grills. We create each product knowing that a warm meal is always better when it's shared with those we love. Learn more about Camp Chef grills, smokers, and portable cooking equipment at campchef.com. That's campchef.com for a better way to cook outdoors.
Hunting and fishing are exercises in hope. Before you head into the woods, you hope to tag out on a deer you'll have to field dress. Before you make that first cast, you hope for a big fish to clean and fillet. When your hopes are realized, you'll need a sharp knife. Whether you sharpen that blade on a power sharpener in the shop or a manual sharpener in the field, Work Sharp has the tool for you. Look for Work Sharp products in sporting goods stores near you or online at worksharptools.com.
Hunt of a Lifetime is a nationwide nonprofit organization dedicated to providing hunting and fishing trips to youth 21 and under who suffer from life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. These adventures make big differences in the lives of those who participate in them, and in many cases are literally a dream come true that brings hope and therapy to their lives. Find out more, get involved, or donate today at huntofalifetime.org. That's huntofalifetime.org. huntofalifetime.org.
You're back in with America Outdoors Radio. I'm John Kruse. If you're like me, you probably enjoy watching fishing and hunting on TV, but usually you got to pay for it. You got to pay an extra price with your cable subscription. If you don't have a cable subscription, you still have to pay an extra price to watch a lot of these shows. But guess what? I found a channel that is offered for absolutely free, and you can watch it on TV, you can watch it on your phone, you can watch it on your computer. It's called Outdoor Action TV. With us here to tell you more about it is Wade Middleton. He is the president of Careco that offers Outdoor Action TV. Wade, welcome to the show.
Hey, John. Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time to visit with me.
So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about this model? You know, you're not charging for your content. Why is that?
Well, I mean, we air a lot of this content on, national networks and places like that as well. But, the reality is so many people now want to watch content when they want to watch it, 24 hours a day and on whatever platform or whatever means and methods that they like to watch it on. And so when we kind of rolled out Outdoor Action TV to not only support all the programs that we have, but many of the producers and friends that we have in the industry, the goal is to make it where they could share their content, the producer, as they like it and want to with some of the partners in there, and not make it a paywall, not make people have to pay. All of us have more of those $6 and $10 recurring charges than we probably ever want to admit in the end, because we don't even remember subscribing to it. And we just kind of felt like this is the way we wanted to take it and build our platform. And it's been very successful. We gain viewership and following every day.
Well, I've got a Roku TV, and I watch the Outdoor Action TV channel on the Local Now network, channel 2113, but you can also watch on Sports TV, TCL, Freecast, and you're on all sorts of apps as well, aren't you?
That's true. I mean, you can download it on your phone. Like you said, you can download it through your Roku. You can download it on your computer to watch it however you want to. And that's just the way of consumption we believe in the future. And I go back, and this kind of dates to how old I am. When I was a kid growing up, we watched Scooby-Doo on the local channels out of Dallas and Oklahoma City, because I grew up in southern Oklahoma. and you had to watch a commercial. We didn't realize that TV would go all the way back to that model in a lot of senses, and they basically call a lot of those fast channels free ad-supported TV. You don't have to pay for the subscription, but they do make you watch a couple of 30-second commercials on a break, which, is kind of the traditional model that a lot of this has gone back to. And it's been very, like I said, it's been very popular, especially with the cord cutters, that don't want to carry as many channels as they used to, an AT&T package, whatever it may be. Because, there's been about 50 million people in the United States that no longer buy the big packages the way I traditionally watch TV in my 40s, and now they pick it up this way. And I think you'll continue to see some of that as that model spreads out.
Here's another question for you. Outdoor Action TV, is it just on demand, or are there live shows as well?
Nope, they're live shows. If you were on the Outdoor Action TV app or on the website right now, you'll see a feed that says live. That's a more traditional look, just like you would on ESPN or any other TV channel out there. There's a grid, there's a lineup at a certain time, certain shows roll out and are, on there. So you can, I turn it on when I'm eating breakfast, and it's whatever we have scheduled. We'll do blocks, like turkey hunting blocks are real big right now. We've got a bass fishing block coming up in May. We'll do whitetail hunting in the fall, where you'll have back-to-back hunting shows that are kind of themed for that time of the year. Or you can go in on demand and pick your favorite hosts that are on their topics, certain shows. Fishing tournaments are a huge and very, very popular asset on there, because people use them to study a lake they're getting ready to have another tournament on, or they're going to be fishing on, and they can use it for research even.
Oh, no. And I love the fact that you've got a couple of series that you follow. One of them, the National Walleye Tour, which
yes.
I think is fantastic that you cover that, and the Collegiate Bass Fishing Series. I don't know about you. If they would have had bass fishing scholarships when I was in college, I would have been all over that. But it's a thing now.
It is, John. Literally, it's something you probably don't know, but 20 years ago, we threw the very first big college fishing tournament. And at the time, I was a pretty big bass tournament guy my own self. So I kind of got tabbed to go do this with Fox College Sports and some of our partners at Cabela's and Ranger and kind of run it. We threw that first event. We had 42 teams show up from all over the nation. And I didn't know if they were going to go to the bar next door or go to the registration. And all of those kids were fired up to fish. They said, yes, sir, and no, sir, and thank you. And they were emailing us after it was over. So it was the greatest, thing they'd ever done. And out of that spawned our Collegiate Bass Fishing Series that we do. We'll celebrate 20 years next season. And I've got goosebumps right now talking about it. I fish and hunt a lot. That really matters. And the people, and you talk about scholarships, college coaches now, I know a bunch of them, they go on recruiting trips and bring kids in just like, Division I football players. It's only going to get bigger. And it is something that is so fun and has really inspired and transitioned a lot of our fishing industry to a positive route. We've got more 20 to 30-year-olds right now in the industry that are fishing competitively or working at companies than I think we've ever had.
Well, I'll tell you what, you have a really diverse lineup and a whole lot of channels, too. I've, checked out some streaming channels before, and they've just got a handful, but you've got a bunch. You got some quality ones. You got Scott Linden's Upland Nation. He is just a great host. My good friend Richie Herod, the host of the Northwest Outdoorsman's, got a show. You've got these tournament channels that we've talked about. You got some Texas-based channels. Pretty much anything you want to do in the outdoors when it comes to fishing and hunting, you've got it covered, don't you?
Well, we do a lot of business with a lot of those guys and creating another, outlet for them, another place to watch, like Scott. You're mentioning a guy that is, he's a legend in that area. Some of the best content you can find. We've been fortunate to work with him in the past. And, he really feeds a lot of great content out that way. And we've even talked about doing more.
Well, I hope you do. He's a quality person. He's actually kind of my mentor. He used to host Outdoor Life and Field and Stream Radio. And when he hung that up, I kind of did my best to fill his shoes, in my own way.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Funny how things work out. All right.
It is.
Let's go ahead and tell folks the website they need to go to find out more about Outdoor Action TV.
Absolutely. OutdoorActionTV.com is an easy place to go get it for all of your on-demand content. You can actually link from there to the live streaming. You can go to the App Store, download the app on your phone if you want to. And like you mentioned, if you just get on your Roku and search Outdoor Action TV, a lot of this stuff is going to pop up that you've mentioned.
All right. The website to go to, again, either outdooractiontv.com or outdooraction.com. That's what I'm looking at right now is outdooraction.com. For Outdoor Action TV, find all the shows that you can watch, find all the ways you can consume it, and turn on that TV or get it on your phone or turn on your computer and start watching the outdoors. It's absolutely free to do so and some really high-quality stuff. Wade, thanks so much for sharing this with us today on America Outdoors Radio.
Thanks, John.
This portion of the show is brought to you by our friends at WorkSharp. And if you are hunting this fall, you know the importance of a sharp knife. You're going to need it for gutting that animal, butchering that animal, taking the hide off that animal, and there's a good chance you're going to have to sharpen it more than once while you're doing these things in the field. That's why a pocket knife sharpener or the guided field sharpener from WorkSharp are great items to have with you. Whether you're after deer, elk, pronghorn, or bear, a sharp knife helps you get things done after you drop that animal. Look for WorkSharp products at sporting goods stores, hardware stores, and ranch and home stores near you, or online at worksharptools.com. That's worksharptools.com.
I'm Anthony Imperato, president of Henry Repeating Arms. Patriotic Americans are looking to protect and provide for their families now more than ever. Henry has over 200 rifles and shotguns to choose from. Made in America or not made at all. And backed by a lifetime guarantee. Order a free catalog, decals, and a list of Henry dealers in your area. Go to henryusa.com or call 1-800-958-4993. Thank you and God bless America.
John Kruse here, looking to improve your bottom line as a business that caters to outdoors enthusiasts. You can do so for a very cost-effective price by advertising on America Outdoors Radio. I will tailor a marketing campaign for you, reaching hundreds of thousands of listeners every weekend, tuning into our show on 135 stations in 33 states. We've got a sponsor opening right now, so contact me through my website at americaoutdoorsradio.com, and let's talk about helping you. Welcome back to America Outdoors Radio. I'm John Kruse. Our next stop is the cowboy state of Wyoming because they have just finished a study there about hooking mortality when it comes to trout. And this is something I've always been interested in because mortality rates when it comes to fisheries often determine, well, the length of seasons, how many fish you can catch, that sort of thing. So it's actually really important to know how lethal your hooking is of a trout and bringing it in. With us here to tell you more about it is Matt Hahn with Wyoming Game and Fish. He's a fisheries biologist there. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, John. Good to be here.
So tell me about this study. Where was it conducted, and how did your biologists go about doing it?
We are located here on the North Platte drainage in central Wyoming, and in the region that we manage here out of Casper, we have 4 really popular tailwater stretches of the North Platte River. So a lot of people have heard of the Miracle Mile. You know, that's kind of a world-famous fishery. And the Gray Reef Reach is another really famous fishery. Then we also have a short tailwater reach called the Cardwell or Fremont Canyon Reach, and then another really short reach that's kind of colloquially referred to as the After Bay.
All right, so that's where it was done. How did your biologists or creel checkers actually conduct the survey?
Yeah, so we've been noticing for probably the last 5 or 6 years that the number of hooking injuries, like really obvious injuries to fish, when we're doing our standard population estimates, had kind of been swinging up, kind of a slow, steady increase in the number of fish that we were seeing with real visible injuries. So several years ago, we decided to come up with a method to really quantify what we were seeing in those fish. And so Jeff Glade, one of the fisheries biologists here, developed kind of a standard classification system to assign a severity ranking to each fish as we're sampling them. And we were collecting data during our usual kind of every other year we do a population estimate on some of these reaches. And so we applied this data or this index to these fish as we were collecting them. And we started to notice some real patterns in injuries. And then in subsequent years, we went in and sort of filled in the gaps in between. So like on the Gray Reef Reach, for instance, there's about 96 miles of river that's classified as blue ribbon water from Gray Reef Dam downstream to the town of Glen Rock. And our standard sites are spaced about 30 miles apart, so we went back in and kind of filled in some of those gaps to look at what's this pattern kind of as you go down the river continuum. So the fish were captured with electrofishing and then had the index to injury severity applied to each fish. So in total, we looked at almost 6,400 individual trout, mostly rainbow trout, but there were some browns and cutthroats mixed in as well.
So I know that different methods of take inflict different types of injury and more severe injury. For example, if you're using power bait and you catch and release a fish, you're more likely to kill it than you are using a dry fly with a single barbed or barbless hook. Did you account for that, or did you just take a look at these fish were hooked and they survived or didn't survive?
Well, we weren't looking at mortality per se. What we were looking at is injury. So obviously there's acute mortality involved in any catch and release fishery. Just because you release a fish doesn't necessarily mean it's going to survive. And there's a whole list of things you can do to improve the survival rate of that. But this was simply looking at injury rates and then correlating the severity of that injury to a body condition index to see what the physiological consequence of some of these injuries is. And so it's really hard to measure post-release mortality in fish. You know, it's just really hard. Anything you do to retain that fish to see if it succumbs to being caught, you know, that treatment in and of itself can contribute to mortality. So we didn't try to tackle that question. We looked at what's the severity of injury and are there possible physiological consequences to these increased injuries? And there was, I guess the short answer is, yeah, there was. You were able to tell that a fish that was more severely injured was in poorer body condition. And, you know, that fish may ultimately succumb to that injury. It may take a week, it may take a month, it may take a year. There's also sublethal effects involved as well. For instance, reduced fecundity, spawning success, things like that to some of these injured fish. So really what we were interested in is the sublethal effects. And can this relate back to what we've been seeing recently with some reduced recruitment success and things, some other indicators we're seeing in the population that kind of tells us we might have a bit of an issue here.
So what are some of the things you learned from this study?
So what we learned is that it's not surprising, but that the percentage of injured fish in a population tracks really closely with what we know fishing pressure does. So some of these areas have a lot higher fishing pressure than other areas, and those areas had the highest incidence of hooking injury. And as you move down the river farther and farther, where pressure really tapers off, the amount of injuries really tapered off as well. So that's one thing. We didn't look into the mechanisms causing injury other than we just know this is a hooking injury, right? So there's no way for us to tell if that was due to a treble hook, if that was due to bait, if that was due to fly. But the one thing we do know from doing creel surveys is that the vast majority of the use on the river is fly fishing. There's very little lure use. There's very little bait use. And then the other thing is a lot of the lure and bait fishermen down in the lower reaches where we don't have special regulations tend to be the guys that are harvesting fish, right? So if a fish is caught on a treble hook and it injures the fish, from this standpoint, it doesn't matter because the fish is probably getting harvested.
Right.
So that doesn't really play into it. So mostly what we're talking about is, 99+% of the use in these areas with high injury is all fly fishing use. Very, very little lure use, and in a lot of these reaches, you're not allowed to use bait at all.
Did you have a percentage of fish that were severely injured by fly fishermen? Or I should say, just in general?
Yeah, so total injury, the highest we measured, which was in the little short reach we call the after bay, was almost 90%. So it was 87.9% of those fish had injury related to being caught and released. And if you just look at what we classified as severe or massive injury, meaning, these are pretty significant injuries and they definitely impact the fish's ability to feed, reproduce, just go on doing what they're doing. It was the highest we measured was about 24%, and that was at the Miracle Mile reach. And so in the Miracle Mile, you've got about 75% of the fish show obvious signs of hooking injury, and 23% of the fish are classified as severe or massive injury. So it's pretty darn high, really.
Well, a few tips on safely catching and releasing fish is, number one, keep them in the water. Get them in fast, release them fast. That you've heard the old phrase, CPR, catch, photo, and release. It's all about making the experience the least stressful you can for that fish. And if it's really hot out, don't go fishing for these fish. There's something called hoot owl restrictions that occur during the summer when the water temps get high, because just playing that fish can actually kill it. So keep all that in mind and catch and release your fish safely. Consider the use of barbless hooks. That helps as well. And have fun fishing, but realize you are making an impact on these heavily pressured areas. Anything else you would like to add, Matt?
No, I think, like what you just said, we're really kind of pushing people to think about, if you're catching and releasing fish, think about how you're doing it. Use barbless flies, scale your hook sizes down if possible. If you're fishing with lures, consider using a single point barbless hook. All these things can really be important for minimizing injury. And then obviously the common sense stuff comes into play with the heat, if it's water's warm, and kind of consider how you're fishing the river. If you're floating in a boat, spread your use out over long reach. Don't camp on one hole and catch as many fish out of that hole as possible before moving on. It's all kind of boils down to a volume thing. The more fish that are caught, the more likely there's injury. And so when we get this concentrated pressure in short reaches of river, I think is really exacerbating this issue.
I completely agree. So catch and release, folks. It's a great thing to do, especially when it comes to trout in these wonderful places like we have in Wyoming. But you got to be smart about how you do it so you don't impact the fishery itself. Matt, thanks so much for sharing this with us today on America Outdoors Radio.
Yeah, thanks, John. It was good talking to you.
Come explore the Dalles in Oregon for outdoors fun. Hike amongst the wildflowers, bike our riverfront trail, or visit the Gorge Discovery Center where you can enjoy a live raptor display, or even check out our National Neon Sign Museum. But don't forget the fishing. We've got salmon, steelhead, bass, walleye, and monster-sized sturgeon waiting just for you. When the day is done, tell those tall tales at one of our wineries, breweries, or restaurants and plan your next adventure. Find out more at explorethedalles.com.
Immerse yourself in a complete Alaska wilderness experience through Sportsman's Cove Lodge. Up to 6 of you will spend a week in a beautiful waterfront log home in a secluded cove. Every day is a new adventure. Go on a guided fishing trip or haul in a bounty of shrimp and crab. Visit a Native American village where totem poles are carved. Go on a whale or bear watching trip and return back to your very own place at the end of the day. Find out more about the Alaska Wilderness Experience at alaskasbestlodge.com. That's alaskasbestlodge.com.
We love our children. We protect them. We guide them. We prepare them for life in the world. With all that we do from deep in our hearts, we cannot control all things. Life-threatening illnesses and disabilities affect far too many of our children each year. While we cannot change the circumstances, we can make dreams come true. Dreams to provide hope, to provide spiritual healing and strength, to provide moments of happiness and relief in the darkest of times. We can give a glimmer of light and hope in a time of darkness and despair. Join huntofalifetime.org to help make dreams come true, to provide hope for children with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Hunt of a Lifetime is a nonprofit organization fulfilling dreams for hunting and fishing trips to youth 21 and under with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Visit huntofalifetime.org to learn how you can make a difference. That's huntofalifetime.org.
You know, it's true. Difficult times have a way of focusing us. We have to think about what matters most when it comes to our spending, our health care. No doubt. This is why so many people are joining Metashare right now. Medishare is a trusted way to save up to 50% on your monthly healthcare costs. More than 400,000 people have already made the switch. It's pretty obvious why, too, especially now during this challenging season with healthcare costs and out-of-pocket expenses going up. Medishare can save you a lot of money. The typical family saves $500 a month. And Medishare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry that's worked beautifully for 29 years. There are different options to choose from to fit your budget. I'll give you the number here in a second, and if you call, you can get a price within 2 minutes. Maybe now is the perfect time to make the switch and start saving. Here you go. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE 40. 855-SHARE-40.
Welcome back to America Outdoors Radio. Our next stop is Pennsylvania. That's where we get to talk to Joe Cermele. He is the fishing editor for Outdoor Life, and he just penned an article about fishing for pike, that toothy and in some cases very big species of predatory fish that are all sorts of fun to catch. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again, John. It's good to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your love for pike fishing.
So it's funny, and it starts like this. I am extremely cursed with muskie fishing. This is a known thing with my friends and listeners of my podcast. I'm just terrible at muskie fishing, though I have traveled a bunch for them. I'm also a huge proponent of the underdog chain pickerel. Where I grew up in New Jersey, you know, if you wanted esox, you wanted toothy fish, they were the most prevalent, and I don't think those fish get enough respect. But pike are sort of the happy medium, right? They grow a lot bigger than pickerel, but they're a lot less at least to my eye and in my experience, than muskies. So they are my favorite esox for that reason. You know, that it's just muskies, I feel like they eat once a month or that, and, you know, a big pike might eat once a day. So I've always just had a love for those.
Well, I don't blame you at all. I mean, one of the most memorable fishing trips of my life was up in the Northwest Territories. We were staying at a little lodge that was on a chain of lakes, and we hit it perfect. It was right at ice out, something that you mentioned in your article is a great time to fish. And you couldn't keep the pike off the hook. We were catching them like 36 to 40 inchers every day. It was just an amazing trip.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, John, because, you know, in my career, I've been blessed to travel far and wide to fish. So people routinely ask me, like, well, where's your favorite place? What's the best trip you've ever been on? And it was to Cree River Lodge in northern Saskatchewan many years ago. And it sort of blows some minds. And it's like, pike? Really? A pike trip of all the places you've been? But similarly, it was so good that if you got a 30 to 40 incher on the line, you were hoping it shook off because that wasn't that big of a deal. So one of the most amazing things I've ever done was that trip.
So let's talk a little bit about some pike fishing advice. And I guess we need to start with the leader. Monofilament leader, not such a good idea.
Sure, yeah. That is sort of the one constant with pike, you know, barring certain things, like if you're throwing really big, hard lures that would be impossible for the pike to swallow, maybe you can skip it. But for the most part, you can't. And whether you're fly fishing or bait fishing or throwing lures, you do have to put some kind of bite leader on there. And conversely, this is why pike and pickerel, for that matter, too, are such a scourge to so many fishermen, bass guys in particular, because if you're not trying to catch them and you're targeting bass in water that they cohabitate with, you will lose a lot of lures. I mean, their teeth are razor sharp. They can open their mouth very wide and inhale anything. And if it gets in those back teeth, which are like razor blades and scissors, you're cut. So no matter how you're doing it, where you're doing it, or what size the pike are, yes, you need some kind of bite leader.
Let's talk about lures. You know, when I went to the Northwest Territories, we were throwing like big Daredevil spoons and the classic 5 of diamonds.
5 of diamonds, yep.
Yes, those big spoons, they work, but there's other lures you can use too and other offerings too, isn't there?
Sure, there's tons. And I think, and you know, it's funny because I'm sure there are some trophy pike hunters out there in the world who would disagree with this. But another thing that I love about them is they just feel, to me, a bit less finicky than muskies, and especially when you're talking about somewhere that's not highly pressured. So yes, like where you and I have gone to far northern Canada, that's one thing. But even if you find those in waters in the lower 48 where they're not overly pounded on, Pike are just not that picky. There's really no category of lure that won't take a pike. You know, they respond to vibration and flash, and they're aggressive feeders. They're often triggered, whether they're actively hunting or not. If something gets in front of their face that's a meal, bang, they go. And then conversely, what I always thought was cool about them is in the colder months, if you live somewhere where maybe you have late ice or no ice, you can also go pike fishing in the style of catfishing. They will sort of slow down a little bit, and they'll take a chunk bait, a piece of sucker or bluegill where that's legal, or a shiner right off the bottom. So they kind of run the gamut in terms of what they'll eat.
Something that stood out in your article for me was the use of topwater lures in the spring and summer. Now, I associate topwater lures with bass. Never thought of using them for pike before.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and, it has to be right. They're not necessarily the go-to year-round. And what I wrote in that article, which I think holds up, is extremely exhilarating, but you're sort of filling numbers to get that you want. Like, I personally have not been in a scenario, even up in Canada, where, topwater is the thing. You're going to get the most strikes within a given day on topwater, but it's so violent and so fun that for me, especially in a place like that where there's a lot of pike, and just get the satisfaction of those few hits. And what I think is so unique about them, and it certainly isn't all the time, but bass as an example, sometimes it's an explosive hit out of nowhere. You don't see it coming. But with so many different kinds of fish, they'll give themselves away on a topwater. You'll see a ripple, or you'll see the fish flash, or you sort of know it's coming. And anglers have a tendency to always be looking behind their lure, or expecting a fish to come in behind a topwater or up from underneath. Pike do this thing, called T-boning, and they do this with subsurface lures too, where they hit sideways. So, man, you'll be working a topwater, whether it's a popper or a prop bait or a spook or whatever it may be, and just from left to right, out of nowhere, across it, just wham, and you have no idea that it's coming. And I think I wrote they ambush sort of similarly to like a barracuda or a wahoo. They'll do the same thing in saltwater where they T-bone a lure, and it is a ripper of a hit when it happens.
Oh, I'm definitely going topwater the next time I go pike fishing this summer. One other thing that you mentioned in the article, hook sharpness. That's something that makes sense, but I'd never thought of before.
Sure. Hook sharpness, in my opinion, in general, across all fisheries, I don't care what you're doing, it's just a very overlooked thing these days. It's something that I don't think enough anglers pay attention to. And it's extremely important, I think, when you're dealing with fish like pike or muskies, or, I do some snakehead fishing, anything with a hard mouth. So pike have this elongated mouth, and it opens wide. But if you look at the structure of their mouth compared to a bass or a trout, there's not quite as much soft tissue in their actual elongated mouth. It's a lot of bone, it's a lot of jawbone and teeth. So your hook has a little less room to grab, like a little less room for purchase. So, you talk to any muskie guy, any dedicated muskie guy, that guy is sharpening his hooks constantly. If you bump a log for a second, or get hung up for a second, or catch a fish, they are constantly checking those hooks, both the point and the cutting angle. And pike in particular is one of those things where I really think that matters, because if you're using dull hooks, I've seen it in fly fishing, I've seen it in lure fishing, you get a good stick on a pike and you think you're tight, and that sucker opens his mouth or shakes and the hook pops right out. So while I think it's important, everywhere, I think it's especially important when targeting pike.
We are out of time, but folks, if you want to learn more about some pike fishing tips and advice, just go to outdoorlife.com and take a gander at Joe Cermele's article on this subject. Definitely a good read. As a matter of fact, there's all sorts of great stories at outdoorlife.com. So head on over there, read about pike, read about other issues when it comes to fishing and hunting. You're going to enjoy the next few minutes if you do. Joe, thanks for sharing this with us today on America Outdoors Radio.
Anytime, John. I hope you get that big pike on a topwater this season.
Me too. A quick reminder for you about our podcast, our new one that is airing on YouTube exclusively on the Cove Sportsman's Network. That is the site for Sportsman's Cove Lodge, and they are airing the Pacific Northwest edition of America Outdoors Radio every week. And this includes 13 minutes of extra content that you're not hearing unless you're tuning in to Seattle Sports Radio 93.3 KJR. And the content is all about the Pacific Northwest. So it's both a national show and a regional show. It's a hybrid, so to speak. It's definitely worth a listen. Again, look for America Outdoors Radio on the Cove Sportsman's Network on YouTube. Before we go today, we've got another story for you from Outdoor Life. It takes place in Minnesota, near a rural area north of Deer River. Now, about 6 weeks ago, local residents were jolted by the sound of explosions in the Bowstring State Forest. Who set off these explosives? None other than the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. They were destroying 2 deer stands that had been there for a decade, big ones, enclosed, built illegally. And they tried to get a hold of the owner, had no success in having any conversations with them to tear them down, so they used dynamite to blow up the 2 tree stands. And I'll tell you what, it definitely worked, looking at the photos at Outdoor Life. However, a criticism, and a rightful one, that the residents have is that DNR didn't clean up the mess. They just left everything there, to include the det cord used to light off the dynamite. So on the one hand, very innovative way to solve a problem, which the Minnesota DNR definitely did, but not so good on the follow-up. And on that note, it is time to go. But here's hoping that you are blessed in the days ahead, that you're healthy, and that you get to enjoy some of the great spring weather we've been seeing across much of the United States. After all, it is your country and you're outdoors, so get out there and enjoy it.